Hello, fictional. Welcome to the Fiction Series X. Today we are gonna see, what if Sona was Issei fiance? Part 9. If you end up liking this video, please consider subscribe, so without further ado, let's get into the video. After Tiamat got Issei, Bova and Zophiel home, the three lounged about for the remainder of the day while they waited for the other members of Issei's peerage to return. Even though Sona was staying in the Lucifuge home with Issei, her peerage was still staying in the Citri home. While she'd been training with her sister and mother, her peerage was training with Seraphol's peerage as well. Sona had seen glimpses of their training and was satisfied with what she'd noticed, so she chose not to check in with them when her own training was finished. Instead she rushed over to the Lucifuge home wanting to spend the rest of the day with Issei. The moment she arrived on the property they could all sense her, which was a shock to Bova, since he didn't think she'd grow strong enough for him to notice her presence without searching for it specifically. The glasses-wearing devil couldn't wait to show her fiancé the results of her training. Because of her own peerage she knew a trick that would surprise Issei. Waiting until he made eye contact, she flared her power, but focused it on the queen piece she had been given by Issei. For his part Issei was certainly surprised by the new level of power she displayed, but he didn't show it. When she noticed Issei didn't even flinch at her little trick, Sona pouted, and to Issei it was adorable. He strode to her side and wrapped her up in a hug, whispering in her ear about how cute it looked when she pouted. Which caused a couple things. 1, she blushed bright red and shoved him away. And 2, she asked how he wasn't shocked by her new power. "Oh, I was shocked, but I knew you would surprise me, so I asked Drake to help me keep a straight face. He agrees with me on the fact it is adorable when you pout," the brown-haired teen answered. The dragon he played hostess spoke up in agreement. "You really are too cute for your own good. Plus I live vicariously through Issei, so if he wants to do something I'd say about 90% of the time it's something I want to do as well. Unless of course it's making you do something adorable. Then we agree 100% of the time." Sighing at their response, Sona decided to get back at them later. Instead she asked about how Issei wanted to deal with the rating game against Diadora. "Are we going to wait until everyone is back to come up with a plan to deal with Diadora? Or are you working on one right now?" Shaking his head Issei responded. "I've got a couple thoughts rolling around in my head right now, but I want to talk with Papa about them first. We'll do that tomorrow though. I just want to sleep right now." "Why aren't you already asleep then?" Sona questioned, though she had a good feeling as to what the answer was. "I'd like to at least say hi to everyone as they return. But even if I don't manage that I wanted to at least wait for you. It's hard to sleep when I don't have you in my arms." In her head Sona was smirking, since she knew that was what he'd say. But that didn't stop her from blushing at his words anyway. Gently slapping her cheeks, Sona shook her head and forced her blush to fade. After a moment the dark-haired girl decided she agreed with him, as she'd also had a hard time sleeping during the last 2 weeks. Reaching out she intertwined her hand with one of his and pulled Issei towards the stairs. "Let someone else make sure they get home okay. I want some us time. Even if it means you just hold me while you sleep," she said in a soft tone, unable to admit it out loud without being embarrassed. Though he wanted to say no and at least wave at his friends as they returned from their training, Issei couldn't find it in himself to turn his fiancée down. Instead following Sona up to his room and curling up with her in his arms. The next day, Issei and his peerage were all gathered in the East Wing's lounge as they discussed minor details for their upcoming battle with Diadora's peerage. Of course this was only because Issei wanted to wait for his father and the other important guests that needed to be present for the discussion to show up before they could really start planning. Bova was in the middle of suggesting that Issei use transfer on him after he went into his full dragon form and letting him roast them with his fiery breath when Issei's familiar Tawny opened the door and lead Serziches, Azazel, and Vali into the room. Greetings were exchanged quickly as they sat down. "So, you mentioned having a few questions to help create your counter plan?" Serziches asked as he looked at his oldest son. Issei nodded in return, before openly wondering how the rating games determined the locations they were held at. Normally, a place is selected at random by the judge and a team of capable magicians build a replica of the location inside a pocket dimension. "Why? Is it possible to hijack the teleportation process? I recall Mama directly teleporting us into the pocket dimension when I helped Riaz out with the game against Riser." Azazel, being the genius he is, caught on to what Issei was thinking. Answering in Serzich's steady confirmed Issei's fears. "Yes, so long as you use sufficient magic power you can alter the location a teleportation spell will transport people to. You think Diadora will have someone attempt to alter the destination you are sent to, so he can have the advantage?" Issei lowered his head slightly in response, before speaking up again. "Yeah. If they can change the location of the rating game, then Diadora can have allies waiting to ambush us. Or set traps. Or both." Vali chimed in at this point. "I'd wager you hit the nail on the head for their plans. So long as they control the location, they have the advantage for the reasons you just said, along with several others. Though I wouldn't put it past them to try and kidnap someone as well just to hold as a hostage, should you provide more resistance than they planned for. Agreeing with the point, Sirziches spoke up. So what are you thinking then, Issei? You wouldn't have asked if you didn't think it was possible. Smiling at his father, Issei commented, let's keep a few aces hidden up our sleeves. Which drew questioning looks from most of the people in the room. Vali, Bova and Tiamat were the only ones to catch on to what Issei was planning. Bova and Tiamat because they were there when Issei was experimenting with the idea, and Vali because he'd already had a similar thought. Smirking as he shook his head at Issei's words, Vali supplied the answer everyone was waiting for. Dragon seals. Depending on how much you practiced with them, you could hide one of us inside a sealed dimension as a backup in case things get rough. Instead of responding, Issei just activated his dragon seal, and the legendary sword Ascalon appeared in his hands. Since everyone present knew that Michiel had given it to Issei as a wedding gift, no one was surprised to see it. The shock they were feeling came from the fact that Issei's seal was strong enough to hide such a powerful object. Bringing his hands together as he spoke, Azazel gave the group a wicked grin. Well, if your seals are strong enough to hide that blade, then we can set up quite the surprise. Lightly flaring his magic, Azazel created a communication circle next to his ear as he contacted one of his lab assistants back at the Grigori headquarters. A moment later, he was holding a few special items he'd made when he was researching the sacred gear called Annihilation Maker. This little beauty you see right here is something I finally finished a few days ago. Similar to the Annihilation Maker sacred gear, it's based off of it can create anything its user imagines. However, if you try and create something that already exists, like say you try to create a copy of me, it would instead just pull on my magic and force me to appear. Eyes going wide at the mad genius it would take to create the object being held in Azazel's hands, Issei had to reevaluate the fallen angel, suddenly glad he was a friend instead of an enemy. But just after he calmed down from the shock, his eyes went wide again as a thought hit him. You mean if I take this with me and get into a pinch, I could use it to get back up in the form of anyone I've ever met? Issei asked in a whisper as he was in awe. Well, yes. But if things get bad, don't think to use it to get an army. It will overheat and need to cool down after repeated use, and if you force it to keep working at that point it will break. Hard limit before you need to let it recharge should be about 10 uses. Gently taking it from Azazel's outstretched hands, Issei used his dragon seal to hide the device away, along with returning Ascalon into his seal as well. Sirziches sighed at that. I was going to give him a summoning paper that would call for me and my peerage, but I think your invention is a better idea. However, that doesn't account for the biggest problem. Vali's probably right about the fact that they may try to kidnap someone. But without knowing who they'd target, we can't really give them special protection. Sona spoke up with her idea on the matter. It's going to be either Zophiel or Kalwerner. Whoever gets kidnapped is going to be a result of what Diodora wants, and they're the only ones that they could target for that. Eyebrow raised at that, Azazel asked Sona to explain. Well, they should theoretically target me, since that would be the easiest way to stop Issei in his tracks, but because I'm the most obvious choice they'll know it won't work, since they wouldn't be able to separate me from Issei. Though we've already got something in place for if that happens. In their eyes, Bova, Garen, and Kaneko aren't huge threats. Plus Diodora doesn't really care what happens to you three. That leaves Zophiel and Kalwerner, both of whom he was interested in when we saw him at the youth conference. Garen conceded the point, Bova huffed at the idea of the enemies underestimating him, and Kaneko just nodded silently. At this point their conversation was interrupted as a magic circle appeared next to Azazel's ear. He listened for a moment before sighing. The fallen angel told the person he was communicating with to come join him in person to discuss what they wanted to talk about. He gave a precise location away, and a moment later a magic circle appeared and the one to step out of it was Michiel the Archangel, who spoke up instantly. Sorry to interrupt, but I looked into things more after Azazel spoke with me a few weeks ago. Turning towards the blonde and black-haired man, he continued speaking with sadness evident in his voice, even as he laid a handful of folders on the table in front of everyone. Brother, you were right. Every member of that young devil's peerage is a former holy maiden. I promise you I will make him pay for that, Michiel. Issei said in a solemn tone as he placed a hand over his heart while looking at the blonde angel. Completely ignoring the folders that Azazel had opened, showcasing each member of Diodora's peerage. What can I offer to help? Michiel questioned, as he realized they were discussing how to deal with the situation. Sona, being the quick thinker she was, explained how Zophiel and Kalwerner would be the most likely targets to be used as hostages. I see. Well, there isn't much I can do to prevent that. I can provide some extra defensive measures for Kalwerner at least. The blonde angel started before turning to the navy blue-haired woman and continuing. Sister, you still carry your holy sword, yes? If you can still comfortably wield it, then we can recharge the holy power inside it a bit. If you'd like, I can see about getting you a shield from our armory as well. The synergy between the two should be enough to allow you to generate a holy barrier for a time. Nodding her head, Kalwerner presented her sword to Mitchell. He did exactly as he'd suggested, and within moments Kalwerner was gifted with a golden shield. While its holy presence wasn't much on its own, when she placed the shield next to her sword, the two objects began shining brightly. All that leaves is finding a way to protect Zophiel. Issei spoke, bringing everyone's attention back to the matter at hand. How do you feel about teaming up? Vali offered, knowing his rival would catch on to what he was suggesting. I don't mind, but don't get your hopes up. I plan to be the one to crush Diodora after all. Issei answered as a bloodthirsty grin came to his face. One that was mirrored on Vali's face. The few people that knew just how like the two teens were just shook their heads, while everyone else backed away slowly, suddenly concerned about the risk of a fight breaking out. Of course it didn't, as Vali just held up a hand for Issei to fist bump. That's fine by me. After all, this is your raiding game. But that the planning was done, according to the two dragon emperors. Serziches, Azazel, and Mitchell just sighed before returning to their work for the day, all three having deduced what Vali was meaning. Issei told his peerage to rest up as much as they could, so despite the desire to figure out what Vali meant, they left the room to relax. Kalwerner left to find the training room so she could get used to using a shield alongside her sword. Garen went to his alchemy lab because it was a place he felt comfortable in. Kaneko moved to the library and curled up next to a window to sunbath while napping. Sona followed the Nekomata and found a good book to read while she waited to get some alone time with Issei, knowing that he'd be playing games with his rival for a bit. Bova wanted to relax, so he let his wings out and flew off for a bit. Zophiel, however, waited next to the door to the lounge, intending to ask what Vali meant since it involved her. Well, mind if my peerage and I hang out around here today? I'll actually need help tomorrow to get ready for the raiding game. Vali asked as the two teens made their way to the door. Not at all. Though I have to ask. Why haven't you gone to Ajuka about getting your evil pieces? I mean, yeah, they're your friends, but you call yourselves a peerage anyway. It would give you all a slight boost as well. Issei commented. I thought about it, but Ajuka was busy training your mage Garen these last 2 weeks. Plus I did drop by and train with you and Bova for a few days. That really wore me out, to be honest. Was all he got as a response from his white-haired friend before Zophiel ambushed them to ask what was going to happen. Well, no offense, but without going out of our way to protect you, the best way to prevent those jackasses from targeting you is to have my friend Lefay use her magic to disguise me as you for the raiding game tomorrow. Vali told her. I see. But what if someone needs healed and I'm not there? She suddenly asked, concerned that something may go wrong. It's fine, Zophiel. I don't plan to leave you behind. The moment Diodora reveals what they plan to do, I'll use my right as peerage king to summon you to my side. Issei answered as he patted her shoulder comfortingly. Since she would still be present, her fears that something may go wrong were mitigated. Accepting his words with a smile, Zophiel left, making her way to Garen's lab as she found the dark-haired boy to be fun company. Now with that out of the way. What do you say we go play some Smash? I'm game. Agreeing on what to do, Issei led Vali towards his favorite place in the whole house. After taking a full stock of what his home here in the underworld had to offer, Issei approached his staff about using magic to make a basement for the manor. The project went from adding 1 floor as a basement to adding 3, however. But these rooms were only accessible from an elevator that passed through the ground floor without an exit. Tucked away next to his study on the 2nd floor was the only way to the basement, as the facilities weren't meant to be used by non-regular guests. As he explained this to his white-haired rival, Issei began to talk about each of the basement floors. The lowest floor houses an indoor swimming pool, with diving boards at the deep end and a water slide that is meant to be a surprise for Milikas when the young devil comes to visit. It also has a teleportation circle that leads to the Lucifuge clan's hot springs. Issei finished describing the bottom basement floor around the time he and Vali reached the stairway in the entry hall. As they climbed the steps to the 2nd floor, he started talking about the middle floor of the 3 basement floors. Above the pool is a multi-purpose room. There is a snack bar just to the left of the elevator door, and to the right is a little lounge space with a couple couches and chairs. The majority of the room is set up so that when someone pours just a bit of magic into the floor or walls, it would shift to be one of several different things. The room could either be a bowling alley, a tennis court, an archery range, or a basketball court. The last of the 3 basement floors is just a large game room. Inside is a massive TV with several game systems hooked into it. There are a couple 3-foot-tall shelves that are lined with games, each set of shelves being for a different game system. In the center of the room is a large L-shaped couch and a few beanbag chairs. Lining the wall opposite the elevator are several arcade games. Just as Issei finished describing the room's layout, the elevator doors opened for Vali to see the room himself. He was more than impressed with the room, though the feeling didn't last long as he plopped down into a beanbag chair while Issei set up the game. Not a single position had changed hours later when Vali's peerage arrived. Hiroka, despite her desire to cling to her little sister, left Kaneko alone as she napped by the window in the library. The older Nekomata instead followed Sona's lead in finding a good book to read. Arthur and Biku joined the Dragon Emperors in the game room, though neither of them wanted to join in the intense game of Smash Bros, choosing to play the arcade games instead. Arthur's sister LaFay joined Zophiel and Garen in the alchemy lab since she wanted to talk magic with another magician, though she ended up in the library instead as she didn't feel comfortable trying to talk with Garen about magic while Zophiel was trying to flirt with the black-haired boy. The next day, is everyone ready? Issei asked his peerage as they waited to be transferred to the location the raiding game would take place. But before anyone answered, there was a flash of bright light as the teleportation circle they were using was forcefully activated. Last time, is everyone ready? Issei asked his peerage as they waited to be transferred to the location the raiding game would take place. But before anyone answered, there was a flash of bright light as the teleportation circle they were using was forcefully activated. This time, Issei and his peerage were forcefully teleported to a new location. Despite the fact they knew it was going to happen, they pretended to be shocked. After all, having expected Diodora to pull some dirty trick, it wasn't hard to imagine he'd changed the location that their raiding game was supposed to take place in. Though it was easy to fake the surprised looks on their faces due to the fact that they were teleported earlier than the time the game was set to take place. Wasn't our raiding game supposed to take place in a forest? Why are we inside a castle courtyard? Aaron spoke, playing up the confusion in an attempt to put anyone watching them into a false security. His idea partially worked as after a moment Diodora appeared standing on a balcony above them. Welcome, welcome. How do you all like our arena? I like to think I chose a nice little place for our game. The dark green-haired teen spoke, a dark and twisted smile on his face. Closing his eyes to avoid rolling them, Issei sighed. I'll admit, it's a pretty cool location if you're going for the I'm the ultimate bad guy look, he told Diodora, with an open jab at the fact that the other devil was clearly doing something that was evil and wrong. Ah, why that's such an accusation? What have I done to deserve such rude remarks? At this point Bova spoke up, having decided it was time to pummel someone into the ground. Okay, enough of this bullshit. If it weren't for the fact we knew you were evil already, we'd have figured it out when we were forcefully teleported earlier than the game was supposed to be, and to a spot that looks nothing like we were informed our arena would be like. So get it over with and spill it. As the teenage dragon spoke up, he smashed his fists together, clearly showcasing his eagerness to fight. Issei shook his head at his friend's impatience, Garen face-palmed, and the girl sighed. Since they had already figured that much out, Diodora decided to humor the request. Well, that makes things so much easier then, since you've already guessed it. Yes, I have joined the Old Devil's faction. We, along with several other, shall we say, alliances, have borrowed power from Office the Infinite Dragon. Hate to break it to you, but we already knew that. Bova snorted in response. Shrugging at the teenage dragon's words, Diodora raised his right hand and snapped. As he did, the group was surprised to see they were being split up as the ground trembled and created stone walls between them. Bova and Kaneko were together, just as Garen and Zophiel were. Sona was grouped together with Kalwerner. Yet Issei was on his own. Well then, how about this? I'll just imprison the Red Dragon Emperor long enough for me to destroy you all. When I finally let him out, he'll see your dead and broken bodies and fly into a rage. At that point, crushing him will be too easy. As Diodora spoke, the ground raised Issei up into the air high above everyone else as black chains appeared and bound him arms to his sides before a light green cube formed around him, preventing him from seeing outside of his prison. I wonder how best to break him. Leaving your corpses broken and shattered all over the place, with you girls having clearly been ravaged or ravaging one of you in front of him when I allow him to be free. Diodora commented as he snapped once more and his peerage appeared in the courtyard as well. They weren't the only additions to the party, as several dozens of older devils appeared as well. With Issei currently unable to do anything, Sona stepped up to give out the orders for the peerage. I'll admit we didn't think of this as a possible plan you'd use against us. But I don't think it'd work. Zophiel, if you would. I don't think Issei minds you getting a shot at Diodora since he can't do anything right now. Smirking, the dark-haired girl rolled her neck as her illusion faded to reveal Vali. Diodora's eyes widened in panic as he saw the White Dragon Emperor. When Vali saw the panicked look on Diodora's face, he grinned before activating Divine Dividing and flying towards the dark green-haired devil. While Vali has his fun. Bova, Kaneko, you get to deal with Diodora's peerage. Garen and Kalwerner, you two get the Old Devil faction's minions. As for me, I'll work on destroying Issei's prison. Sona called out, turning sharply on her heels to face the stone pillar that Issei was trapped on top of. Bova and Kaneko happily charging into battle. Bova slammed into one of Diodora's pawns, bowling right through her before reaching to his sides and gripping onto the heads of two more pawns. Bashing their heads together harshly, he let them bounce off of each other before shoving them into the ground. As he did that, Bova flipped, his heel catching the chin of the one he slammed into as they attempted to attack him from behind. Scoffing, he turned towards Kaneko. This is too damn easy. The white-haired girl nodded her head as she brought her heel down on top of one of Diadora's rooks in an axle kick. Did we even need to train for this fight? She thought to herself, disappointed that the fight wasn't worth the effort it would be to show off her new tricks. Ducking under a ball of fire, Kaneko lunged towards a bishop and headbutted them in the gut hard enough to instantly knock them to the ground unconscious. I want to trade with Volley. She heard Bova mutter as the two easily squashed Diadora's peerage. Well, Kaneko wasn't sure how the fight would go, she secretly thought the same. Aaron and Halwerner dodged between two fireballs as she slashed her sword across one of the devil's chest, cutting him down with ease. Twirling her body, she blocked another fireball with her new shield before thrusting her sword into an approaching devil. Man, I didn't think they'd be this weak. She commented, surprised at the fact that they were falling in just one or two cuts from her blade. Sure, she knew they were weak to the holy energy it held, but when Michael poured a bit of his power into it, he only put a small amount into it, since she could only handle a small amount of it before the holy power harmed her as well. What she didn't know was that thanks to her training and her natural resistance to holy power despite having been revived as a devil, her tolerance for the holy energy had grown. Before training with Arthur and building her endurance and stamina, she wouldn't have been able to withstand even a quarter of the power that Michael had bestowed upon her weapon. The fact that she was an angel before being revived as a devil was already unbelievable, so the idea that her resistance towards holy energy could be improved still never crossed her mind as she sliced through more and more devils. Aaron, on the other hand, was yawning in boredom. After his extreme training with Ajuka, his magic tore through the devils like paper match. Granted, he was using his high-tiered spells in the hopes of ending the battle quickly due to how disappointing everything was. Still, with his magic power, the old devil's faction peons were nothing but flies to him. This is way too damn boring. I just want to go home and read. The dark-haired teen thought to himself in disappointment. Ollie, geez, this is pathetic. Ollie taunted. Sure, Diadora was pretty strong, however Volley was still easily dominating their battle. In fact, he was having such an easy time dealing with Diadora that he wasn't even fully focused on their fight, instead paying more attention to Issei's peerage as they crushed everything Diadora had brought to fight them. How dare you call me pathetic? Diadora shouted, having finally lost his cool after being manhandled by Volley, who hadn't used more than the basic level of his divine dividing. What, it's true. You can't handle me with just the base divine dividing, and you thought you'd stand a chance against Issei if you pissed him off enough to go berserk. Are you stupid? If either of us lose control over ourselves, we enter Juggernaut Drive, which is far stronger than our balance breakers. Volley yelled as he divided the magical attack that Diadora launched at him into nothing. Hell, I don't really even need to use divine dividing against you, this isn't worth it anymore. Volley said as he deactivated his sacred gear. Sighing, he turned away as he continued. You aren't worth my time. We've delayed this farce long enough for Sona to have gotten Issei free. I'll have more fun watching him utterly crush you than I've had tossing you around like a rag doll. Sona, sheesh. It almost isn't even worth it to do this. Ice could probably just flare his power a little and shatter this barrier like glass. Sona muttered as she swiftly dismantled Diadora's trap that held Issei prisoner. The level of power he displayed was certainly enough to give her pause and make her think it'd be a struggle win if she was the one that had to fight him. But it was actually quite sad. The other devil was pretty wasteful. He used enough power in his spell to entrap Issei for it'd have been a challenge to undo. Except the majority of the power used in the spell wasn't even present in the barrier that encased her fiance. Sighing as the barrier faded, Sona rolled her eyes when she saw Issei twiddling his thumbs. Hey there, he said as he noticed the green cube fade. Despite the fact the barrier prevented him from seeing his surroundings, Issei was still able to hear. Issei, when he'd heard Diadora's taunt about how best to make him go berserk, the brown-haired teen shook in rage. His muscles tensing as he thought about how to destroy the pest before he shook his head and saw his arms were free again. Just the act of flexing his body was enough to break the chains that Diadora had placed on him. Cocking his head at how easy it was to get free, Issei cast his senses outside the barrier for a moment, wondering if perhaps the true trap was to get everyone to relax a bit because their enemies were too weak. As he did, the Peerage King noticed that he could feel Volley from the same direction as Diadora, and Volley hadn't even bothered to power up. I know he's still a fair bit stronger than me, but still. Using his base level against Diadora right now. Did we actually overestimate these guys? He thought as he calmed down. Since no one from his peerage was getting serious, he relaxed and decided to let things play out a bit more before making his move. Even though he could tell it'd be easy to escape, Issei had heard Sona's orders for his peerage, so he knew she was already breaking the barrier down. Sighing, he intertwined his hands and began twirling his thumbs around each other as he waited to be freed. A moment later Sona had him free. "Hey there," he commented when the barrier faded. Smiling as his fiancée rolled her eyes at him, Issei pulled his hands apart. "If it weren't for the fact that we'd have had to deal with Diadora's betrayal eventually, I'd say this was a waste of time," Sona commented as she gestured around them. Issei had heard her orders for his peerage while he'd been inside the green prison, but Bova and Kaneko had already joined Garen and Kalwerner in mopping up the peons from the old devil's faction. At this point there was a little less than a dozen left. Since everyone seemed to be bored already, Issei just flared his power. The force flooring those that weren't prepared for it. "Alright guys, enough playing around. Just sit back and enjoy as I show Diadora just how badly he screwed up," Issei called as he made his way toward Vali and Diadora. Moments later he found the throne room of the castle that Diadora had brought them to. "Geez, your plan sucked. It would have been far more interesting if after separating everyone you made them traverse the castle to even get to their fights, rather than forcing everything to happen in the courtyard," Issei taunted Diadora, happy to see the shock on the other devil's face. "How did you get free?" Diadora shouted as he pointed towards Issei. "Are you deaf as well, or just stupid? Didn't you hear me say Sona had gotten him free?" Vali scoffed from his position as he walked towards the group before turning and leaning on the wall next to the door. "You didn't finish him off?" Issei asked as he looked over at Vali. "He's not worth it. The Dumbus thought he could beat you in a berserk rage when he couldn't even handle me with the base form of divine dividing," Vali explained. Issei wasn't surprised since he had noticed that even while trapped, Garen and Sona both were curious just how strong Vali actually was, since they still had yet to see him go all out. Bova was disappointed, while he knew he wasn't on Issei or Vali's level yet. If neither one of them needed to go beyond their base form to fight Diadora, then he wouldn't need to put his full effort into the fight to win, which meant he wouldn't enjoy the fight either. Kalwerner and Kaneko both just sighed, fully expecting to watch a one-sided beatdown upon hearing the news. "Well, that's no fun. I was planning to utterly crush him. If he's that bad though, that's pretty pathetic." Issei sighed. "Quit looking down on me." Diadora roared in anger as he created his magic circle. Rather than let the dark green-haired teen do anything, Issei vanished from sight, his speed surprising all but Vali and Bova as he was a blur now after his training. When they could see him clearly again, Diadora's hand was being crushed in his vice grip. "Not now, the adults are talking," Issei teased, his words showing just how little he thought of the other teen. Issei's peerage burst out laughing at Diadora. Vali chuckled as well. When Issei heard their laughing, his eyes lit up. "Since you're so weak that I could destroy you just like this, I think I will. But I'll do it in the most humiliating way possible," Issei commented with an evil grin on his face as he threw Diadora into the wall. A moment later he was standing next to the other teen as Diadora struggled to free himself from the wall. Punching forward, Issei embedded the dark green-haired teen's head in the wall with a force. He then stepped back and let Diadora pull himself out of the wall, before throwing a fist straight into his gut and bringing an elbow down on his back after the other teenage devil doubled over from the pain. Turning, Issei pulled his arms back to his sides as he brought his foot into Diadora's side and kicked him into another wall. "Damn. You don't even make a good punching bag," Issei commented when Diadora charged him in a rage at being tossed around. Side, stepping the fist that was thrown at him, Issei stuck his foot up and tripped the other devil. Leaning down and grabbing Diadora's cloak, he stopped the other teen from face planting before yanking on it hard enough to send Diadora flying back into the wall, only a little further away from the previous spot, which already had spiderweb-like cracks. Raising his right hand, Issei created his magic circle before a few spears of ice appeared behind him. Closing his hand into a fist, the lances of ice shot into the dust kicked up from Diadora's impact against the wall. A choked-out shout of pain alerted everyone to the fact that the ice hit Issei's target. With his keen eyes, Issei already knew how Diadora was pinned to the wall, yet he waited for the dust to settle so everyone else could see. When the debris finally settled, the group was treated to the side of Diadora's backside and part of his face. His arms were pinned out to his sides, and one foot was pinned to the wall with a leg fully stretched out, while the other leg was pinned by the knee, which was bent. "Okay, this is boring already. Just give up and surrender quietly," Issei called, attempting to offer an olive branch to his fellow devil in the hopes that he'd turn himself in to avoid being beaten into the ground. Though Issei knew if the teen didn't give in, it wouldn't be a simple beating. "Piss off, you worthless trash," Diadora yelled as he attempted to break the ice that was trapping him. Sighing, Issei reinforced it with his magic. "I really don't want to have to do this," Issei thought to himself as he flashed back to the last thing Ajuka had told him when they were setting up the plans for dealing with this raiding game. Flashback, Michael and Azazel had both left after the strategy meeting. Surziches and Ajuka were leaving too. However, when they got to the door, Ajuka turned around. "Hey Issei, if my brother doesn't surrender. If he doesn't give in to save himself, please end it. When Diadora gets stubborn like that, he won't stop." "Are you sure?" The brown-haired teen questioned in a panic. After all, the older devil had just told him to kill his brother if he didn't turn himself in. Yes. He must be stopped. If he doesn't give in willingly, please end it for me. Ajuka asked, with a grave look on his face, almost as if he knew Diodora wouldn't surrender. Flashback end. I really don't want to have to kill you, so please just give in. Issei commented, while he gathered his power intending to entrap Diodora in ice so he wouldn't have to kill him. Only the heir to the Astaroth clan managed to break free and charge towards him. Punching forward, Issei intended to stop Diodora in his tracks and finish the fight, but the dark green-haired devil ran past him, instead targeting Sona. Even if it doesn't kill her, I just need to harm her enough to piss him off. If he's berserk, I can win this. Diodora thought to himself, confident that the strategy he and Shalba had come up with to kill the Red Dragon Emperor would work if he were berserk during the fight. However, Issei was quick to realize who Diodora was truly targeting. Easily catching on to Diodora's intentions after his attempted counter failed, he used his magic circle to make a spear of ice that lanced through Diodora's side and into the floor, completely stopping him in his tracks. Diodora was shocked to have been stopped so easily, as he still had another 15 steps before he'd have been within striking range of anyone in Issei's peerage. But then he recalled that he could still use magic to attack from his current distance before he could put his idea into action. However, Issei cut him off. That was very stupid of you. Ask anyone in this room what happens when someone tries to attack Sona in front of me. Issei growled out in a dark tone. Before Diodora could throw out his retort, he found his body piercing through an undamaged section of the wall. Issei had roundhouse kicked him so hard he flew like an arrow into the wall. He didn't punch cleanly through, however, as only his head, shoulders, and part of the upper sections of his arms had gone through the wall. But he was stuck, unable to move in the slightest as the lower half of his body dangled in the air. Oh, I know what to do here. Issei commented in a vicious tone as he made a smaller dart of ice. Holding it in his right hand, he took aim before tossing it. The dart pierced into Diodora's lower back before blooming icy crystals that grew out of each other in a clean pattern before melting slightly to become a smooth tail made of ice. Nice job pinning the tail on the donkey. Vali commented, chuckled at the sight. Bova and Garen were full on laughing at the scene, while Sona and Kalwarner both had grins as they shook with silent laughter. Kaneko just rolled her eyes at Issei's antics, though she did wonder just how angry he was towards Diodora for attempting to attack Sona in front of him. Smirking, Issei waited for Diodora to free himself. The other devil charged him once more, a magic circle in one of his hands, as the other was cocked back to be thrown at him. Jumping over the fist, Issei thrust his legs down on the outstretched arm, breaking it with the force behind his kick. It was such an unexpected counter that Diodora cancelled out his magic circle and tried to punch with his free arm before he felt the pain of his arm breaking, which made him flinch instead. Grabbing Diodora's shoulders, Issei headbutted him, which caused the other teen to stagger backwards. Sighing, Issei punched Diodora in the face, hard enough to send the dark green-haired teenager spiraling into a third wall. Snapping his fingers, a magic circle appeared under Diodora. The temperature of the air above the circle plummeted fast as ice began forming, causing Diodora to be encased in ice as he struggled to pull himself out of the wall. This time, because Issei was serious about trapping the dark green-haired teen, it was so thick a shell of ice that no matter how he struggled, Diodora was unable to break free. You know, I'm still rather pissed that you tried to attack Sona right in front of me. But humiliating you is way too easy. I should probably end it. Issei commented as he faintly noticed another presence approaching the castle they were currently inside of. His words causing Diodora's eyes to widen in anger and a slight bit of fear. The rebellious devil struggled to free himself, even as he opened his mouth to call for help from the older devil that had entrusted him with the task of dealing with Issei. Noticing that Diodora was going to call out, Issei cut him off. I wouldn't waste your breath. We already know Shalba's the one that's backing you. Papa and Ajuka both warned me about him, but they also said he's more likely to abandon you than to come to your rescue. Upon hearing Issei's words, Diodora went limp in shock over the fact they knew exactly which of the leaders of the old devil's faction he was working for. Issei, however, turned to Vali. Think it's been long enough? This hasn't even been worth calling a warm-up. I don't know. I mean, Shalba is the reason you guys felt the need to train for this raiding game, right? Vali answered, as he also felt the newcomer approaching, but at a slow pace. Slow enough to tell him that the person had no intention of joining in this battle. Issei noticed that fact as well and sighed. Shaking his head, Issei decided it was time to end the fight. Yeah, but he didn't even show up. Well, I've had enough of this. As he spoke, the boosted gear appeared on his hand. Planning to use his dragon shot technique, Issei recalled the fact he has to focus on creating draconic energy before mentally shaking his head and trying something different. Drawing his natural energy out, he shunted it into the boosted gear and used it to convert the naturally demonic energy into draconic energy. Smiling when it worked, he noticed it was much faster to do things that way, as he had built up enough power in 5 seconds, rather than the 20 it would have taken otherwise. Releasing it from his palm in a beam-like form, he winced when the beam expanded and encased Diodora, causing the wall to crumble apart. The impact releasing a shock wave that shook the room slightly. Sona and Volley's eyes widened at the attack though. They both felt a darker and more destructive energy hidden in the core of the attack. Volley was shocked as the energy was something he hadn't felt before, but from what he could feel it was extraordinarily dangerous, while Sona was worried about the energy, as she had only felt a similar power when she witnessed Urzich's using a small portion of his power once before. But Diodora dealt with everyone wanted to leave. Even though Issei and Volley both felt someone coming their way, they wanted nothing more than to return to Kuo and get on with everything. After all, there was no way to know for sure that the one approaching them was Shalba, not until they actually arrived. Issei thought it would be a waste of time if it wasn't Shalba, however, since only he and the other leaders of the Old Devil's faction were important enough to be labeled as threats that needed to be dealt with. Sharing a look, the two decided it wasn't worth it to stay, and the group used their own magic to teleport back to Kuo. The castle. 20 minutes later, the person they felt approaching the old castle arrived. Only to find the peons that had been sent to help deal with Issei's peerage unconscious. Contemptuously shaking their head, the being looked for Diodora's peerage. Several of their bodies were piled on top of each other. The stack of bodies being those that were knocked unconscious. But those that weren't in the stack didn't have the same luck. 2 that were stuck head first into the ground and 1 that was charred were dead, likely because they were far weaker than expected, which lead to a few simple attacks being lethal. If this is how things are out here, I doubt that fool managed to do any better inside. They spoke, aggravated at the idea that they'd underestimated the Red Dragon Emperor and his peerage. Stepping inside the castle, the person made their way to the throne room, only to find several person-shaped indents into a couple spots on the walls, and one wall that had crumbled almost completely. From the residual power in the room they could tell that Diodora's was defeated, but there was no trace of his body, despite the fact they could sense that he hadn't left the room after the dark-haired teen entered the throne room. The heaviest trace of Diodora's power was in the center of the mostly destroyed wall, so the person took a closer look. Only to find a few tattered remains of a cloak. HMPH. The fool was utterly destroyed by that red dragon brat, they muttered before leaving the throne room. As they exited, the person didn't even glance back as they mused to themselves. Diodora was a far less useful pawn than I expected him to be. I wonder if Crusory has had better luck with our other plans. Issei. When they returned to Kuo, everyone let out a sigh. Since they all had secretly cast a recording spell on themselves before they even entered the room they were supposed to be waiting in before being transferred to the location of the raiding game, it was easy to show the 4 Satans exactly what had happened. Though while they were doing that, Zophiel was yelling at Issei for not using his right as peerage king to call her to his location. It wasn't until Garen dragged her away from the brown-haired teen that he was able to share his perspective of the events, which was unnecessary due to everyone else having been present. Urzich's wanted to see anyway. Ajuka was quiet as he watched the recording. Everyone in the room turned to him, knowing he must be feeling frustrated, upset, and disappointed in his younger brother. But he just sighed before smiling at Issei. Thank you for dealing with Diodora. The old devil faction has to be dealt with, so every time we get the chance to weaken them we should take it. Issei was both shocked and confused at Ajuka's words. Isn't he your brother? I mean, I can understand thanking me for handling it so you don't have to. But you've got to be feeling something right now. Sighing once more, Ajuka explained. Yes, I'm disappointed that my brother by blood did something stupid and reckless. To be honest with you though, it's no different than how I feel towards any other devil that's joined with the old devil faction. When I became the current Beelzebub, everyone in my family cut ties with me. Diodora might have been one of the few that argued against that at first, but he turned against me when I wouldn't use my authority to help his ego. At that, Urzicha slapped Ajuka on the back gently. Which caused the green-haired devil to smile again before continuing. Besides, family isn't bound by blood. I knew it long ago, but my family, the ones that matter to me, are right here. His words brought a smile to Urzich's, Serafal, and even Falbium's faces as they shared a group hug to show they agreed with his statement. A few days had passed since Issei's raiding game with Diodora. Since they completely overwhelmed Diodora, Issei and Sona decided to take some time to relax. He was the biggest threat out of the other teenage devil peerage kings. But that was only because of his allies, who didn't even show up. Sure, the other peerage kings were going to be tricky, but thanks to the intense training they did to be ready for Shalba, if he had shown up to help Diodora, none of them felt concerned. After all, thanks to Diodora manipulating the game location, it was unable to be aired for the others to watch. Which meant Riaz was the only one to know how Issei and his peerage fight, and even then Riaz and her peerage didn't know just how strong they'd gotten from their training. Hence why the 2 peerage kings were relaxing. Because they could teleport anywhere and didn't have to stay in the underworld for the remaining raiding games, both peerages returned to Kuo. Sona had entrusted her queen Tsubaki with running things while she took a mini vacation with Issei. Issei had done similarly, except he left his two familiars Tiamat and Tawny in charge. But since they weren't supposed to be doing much during the summer anyway, they all had plenty of downtime, as evidenced by the fact that Issei was in the middle of a swim meet with Garen and Bova. Damn. Sona muttered under her breath, mad that her alone time with Issei had been interrupted. As the student council president for the school, Sona was in charge of several things, but also had a lot of privileges. She had intended to have a surprise date with her fiance at the school pool. Sure, it needed clean, but with her magic, that was child's play. But the moment she cast her spell, both peerages came by to see what was going on and decided to join in on the fun. Something wrong, Sona? Tsubaki asked, an innocent expression on her face telling Sona her friend knew exactly what the problem was. The glasses-wearing devil just shook her head, choosing to stay silent and not rise to the taunt. Look. We know that things are going to be crazy and hectic after these raiding games are finished, so we're just trying to have as much fun as we can right now. You were off training on your own, so we're here to spend more time with you to make up for it. Issei's peerage was split up, so they're taking the chance to stay together as well. It's not that we don't want to let you two have some time, so much as it is we want time with the two of you as well. Sona understood that. They were all friends. Sure, her peerage got to train together, but she wasn't there. Issei's peerage was split into groups and not all together either. So this was just their way of making up for lost time, since they wouldn't have the chance later. It just frustrated the female devil when her plans fell apart. I'm not mad. At least not at you all. Oh, I know that. So do they. But hey, we've got to tease you while we can. Besides, if you really wanted a private moment with Issei so bad, you could have taken him to the Citri family's private beach. Sona felt a smile come to her face as her queen spoke. Her plans weren't ruined, just tweaked without her permission. But she couldn't find it in her to be mad about it, since she understood that this was likely going to be the last chance they could cut loose and have fun like this for a long while. Not to mention, I wanted to join in. The new voice spoke, causing the two to turn. Walking up to them in a very sensual black bikini was Ria's Gremory. Her friend and Issei's aunt. Not taking every last minute you can before your game with Sakvara. Nope. After all, the results of these games don't really matter. So we decided to just have fun with it. I know you guys couldn't do that with Diodora since he betrayed us and all, but I'd suggest you don't push yourselves with the rest of your raiding games. If you knew just how much of a pushover Diodora was, you'd know that we had already decided that anyway. Though Issei and I still plan on winning, but that's because I need to show I can get results if I want my dream to come true. Ria's rolled her eyes at Sona's words. She might not have been able to see the battle or have been there when Issei's peerage gave their report about the situation to the four Satans, but she'd heard about it from her older brother anyway, when he got drunk with their father during a family dinner and started praising Issei's victory. Still. Relax while you can. I was talking with Surziches for a bit last night after dinner, and he said that they've been thinking of trying to bring a few other groups into the alliance. Depending on how things play out, we may be guarding the talks like we did at the faction meeting. I know. Serafal mentioned it to me while I was training with her. Riaz wanted to taunt her friend about just how overprotective Serafal was, but was silenced by a smirk from Tsubaki. The look on the queen's face said something along the lines of, I know what you're going to say. But you don't have any room to talk. Around this time, Issei walked up to the trio. Oh, here he is. What's up? I just wanted to join in on the fun. Zenovia's still changing into her swimsuit. Akeno will be here after a bit. She's having a lunch date with her dad. Kiba and Gasper should be here soon too. I know Gasper needed a swimsuit and Kiba wanted to finish the puzzle he was working on before he came by. The moment the redhead finished speaking, the pretty blonde boy that was Kiba joined them. He was wearing a simple pair of black swimming trunks, similar to Issei's. Except his brown-haired friend had a solid red stripe running down the side of each leg. Hello. They all offered their greetings to the blonde knight, who turned to his peerage king after a moment. You may want to have a talk with Gasper. He's changing into a swimsuit now and well, never mind, you'll just have to see for yourself. Issei, Sona, and Tsubaki looked at Kiba curiously as he groaned at the thought of the damper. It had been a while since they last saw him, so they didn't know what the issue could be. Riaz, however, had a good idea. You thought because we finally got him to wear the male school uniform he'd stop cross-dressing, didn't you? Not really. More like I hoped he'd stop using the woman's changing room at the very least. Shaking her head with a smile, Riaz told her knight not to worry about it. Zenovia and a very embarrassed Gasper joined them after the knight began stretching. Zenovia was wearing a deep green two-piece that would have gotten her in trouble had school been in session. Gasper, however, had a light blue swimsuit. The top was covering enough to be considered a crop top, but considering Gasper was a male, there wasn't really anything that needed to be covered. The bottom had frills making it seem a little childish, but it didn't look bad on him. Mostly because his short stature made him seem like a kid anyway. It's been a while. Issei offered as a greeting to the two. The others chiming in after a moment. Gasper nodded shyly. Issei's eyes narrowed at that. He was slowly reverting back to the quiet and timid personality he had when they first met. Normally it wouldn't have mattered to the brown-haired teen, but when he was training Gasper and got him to open up to the others, the timid part of his personality vanished. Zenovia smiled as she offered her greetings, though she tried very hard to hide her blush when she greeted Issei. She'd been around long enough now to know how Sona handled people flirting with Issei, and she didn't want to upset her, especially since Issei and Sona were engaged. "What's wrong, Zenovia? Your face is already red," Issei asked, making her sigh mentally as she failed to hide it. But since she was a very honest and open person, she couldn't lie to them about the reason. "Well, the only real desire I've ever had was to have a child with a strong person, and you fit that description. But I don't want to get between you and Sona. It's hard to hide that I'm attracted to you though. Please don't mind me though. I'm sure I'll meet someone else." Issei went wide-eyed at her words. As did Tsubaki, Rias, Gasper, and Kiba. Sona however just sighed. She had seen the situation coming. Luckily Issei recovered and spoke up. "I'm sure you'll meet someone else too. Thanks for being a good friend about the situation though. I'm actually a little tired of having girls confess to me. Before we started summer break, I had several girls trying to get between Sona and I, and it really bothered me." As he spoke, the teen gently intertwined his hand with Sona's. He gave her a soft smile that made her want to kiss him. The more the desire built inside her, the more she wanted to take Tsubaki's advice and flee to her family's private beach with him. He could tell that she was plotting something, but he wasn't ready to leave just yet. Issei kissed Sona's forehead before stepping back. "I know you've got something going on in that head. We can do whatever it is after a bit. I want to have another race with Garen and Bova. You want in Kiba?" "Sure." The two males left the group with matching grins. Sona couldn't help but smile softly as she melted just a little bit from Issei's affection. Tsubaki was happy for her friend and decided not to tease her for once. Ria smiled, happy to see just how devoted Issei was to Sona. Zenovia had a small smile as well, though hers was because she finally got things off her chest. Despite his habit of cross-dressing, Gasper didn't want to risk being caught up in a girl talk about the situation and wandered off to the shade by Kaneko, who was napping. An hour later, "You know, I'm only just now noticing you aren't in a swimsuit, Sona." Ria spoke, having an idea as to why her friend was still in regular clothes. But she wanted to make Sona admit it since teasing her was so much fun. However, the glasses-wearing devil knew what the redhead was trying to do. Even though she was embarrassed, Sona spoke calmly and without blushing as she tried to ruin Ria's fun. "I was going to show Issei my new swimsuit. But it's for his eyes only, and everyone else came by before I could get changed. Speaking of, I'm going to take my chance now. We'll see everyone later." Standing up, she wandered over to Issei, who was toweling off. He had raced with the other guys a couple times before coaxing Kaneko into the pool. He knew she was still a beginner when it came to swimming, so he wanted to help her out, and the rest of the hour had been spent coaching her as she doggy paddled through the water. With a smile, Sona put her hand on Issei's shoulder before activating her magic and teleporting them away. Since everyone was expecting it to happen at some point, they didn't make a big deal about it and let the two do their own thing. "Where are we, Sona?" "Well, since they interrupted my original plan, I figured I'd let them have a bit of fun before making things private again," Sona answered as Issei looked around at the beach they'd arrived on. Pure white sand and amazingly clear water were his clues that it was a very luxurious beach. Which meant it was a private beach. But he put that to the back of his mind as he asked what her original plan was. "I wanted a private pool date with you. I even bought a new swimsuit just for you. But I didn't get to show it off," she said as she walked towards a small little shack. Issei followed as he noticed the shack was built to be dressing rooms and showers to rinse off the sand. But he was polite and waited outside of the shack while Sona changed. When she came out, he couldn't help the blush that came across his face as his heart skipped a beat. The simple two-piece ocean blue bikini was what she had chosen. Except, the top covered less than he'd expected. It provided no side coverage, instead being two triangular pieces of cloth with a string connected them from one corner. The other corners had strings, the top two running up and over her shoulder, while the two remaining sided wrapped around her chest to tie together in the back. A faint light green stripe on each split the triangles in two. A waterproof and slightly sheer sarong blue skirt was tied on her left hip. As he studied it, Issei noticed little faded white stars decorated the skirt. She had a red bracelet that was patterned to look like flowers despite being plastic on her left wrist. A red lily was tucked into her hair to finish the look. Being blue and green, it was her signature colors when outside of her school uniform. But he appreciated the red bracelet and flower as they were a subtle nod to his signature color of red. Issei struggled to swallow as he tried to find the words to describe just how beautiful she was. Sona, you're so beautiful, that swimsuit is exceptionally gorgeous on you. At his words, Sona couldn't help but go bright red, the color in her face matching the lily in her hair. Which was a surprise addition that she hadn't been expecting to show off. But when she entered the changing room there was a vase fully of lilies and she thought adding a bit more red to her look would please her boyfriend. It took both of them a moment to calm themselves after that. Recovering enough to move about again, but not enough to speak without the fear of stumbling over her words, Sona just stepped close to her boyfriend and kissed him on the cheek before tugging on his hand as she led him towards her favorite spot on the beach. Silently she thanked Tsubaki for suggesting the private beach as a location for the two of them to be alone. Sona had Issei sit down before snuggling into his lap as they looked out over the water at the sunset. Together they sat, unaware of the fact that they had a few giddy adults watching them with smiles as they secretly took photos. This date might not have been what you originally planned, but I think this is much better than it would have been with the school pool. Issei mumbled into her ear, though Sona also felt his chest rumbling as he spoke. She shivered at the feeling as she pushed her body into his, hoping to feel it again. Yeah. This is way better. She replied, tilting her head back and sideways to kiss him once more, except on the lips this time. The last few weeks had been interesting to Issei and his fiancée Sona. After their first rating game with Diodora, they decided a wait-and-see strategy would be best for the rest of their games. The second game they had was for Sona's peerage against Zephyrdor. Since Issei wanted to kick his ass for openly mocking Sona's dream, he reveled in the fact that he would be in the battle as part of Sona's peerage. In the end though it was a letdown. He didn't even have to activate boosted gear to thrash the other peerage king. Then they had a rating game against Rias. She and her peerage put up a decent fight, managing to just barely take Kalwiner out of the fight after she defeated both of Ria's pawns and fought a 2-on-1 fight with Kiba and Zenobia. But she was avenged by Kaneko, who completely surprised Rias and her peerage with how much she had grown since joining Issei's peerage. Though the Nekomata retired from the game, it wasn't due to being defeated so much as it was because she wore herself out after finishing off the 2 knights and defending herself from Akeno, long enough to be rescued by Bova. But in the end, thanks to Sona's strategy and the strength of Issei's peerage, Rias was defeated. The fourth rating game was Sona's peerage against Sekvera. While it was more challenging than Zephyrdor, Sekvera's peerage was not as difficult as Ria's peerage. So once again, with an excellent strategy from Sona, they claimed victory. You know, the two of you are something else. Serug commented when they met up a day before the rating game that they were going to have. The heir to the Bale clan and cousin to Issei had been coming around to hang out with him in an attempt to get to know his long-lost cousin better. What do you mean? Surziches and the other Satans decided to make your achievements known to the public. You've handled several Rouge Fallen Angels, Issei helped dissolve Ria's engagement to Riser, you guys and Rias helped the Grozauber during a siege, you fought off a cadre class Fallen Angel, defeated a traitor to Devil Kind, and are undefeated against the other peerage kings your age. Either we just have the good luck to get through it all, or we've got some seriously bad luck that causes us to be involved in all of this stuff. Issei replied, not wanted to get a big head despite the fact their accomplishments were praiseworthy. Sona rolled her eyes at her fiancé's words. Though she did agree on the fact they didn't go looking for trouble. But I plan to prove myself as one of the strongest, so my peerage and I'll be handing you your first defeat in a rating game tomorrow. Good luck with that. Issei replied, confident in their power. Well, it was fun, but I've got to get back and finish up a few final preparations for tomorrow. I'll see you during the rating game. Serug replied as he stood up from his seat at the table where they'd been eating lunch while talking. Issei smiled as he gave his cousin a small wave and Sona politely said that they'd see him later. Issei, he might be more of a challenge than Rias. Yeah. He suppresses it well, but thanks to training with Tannen and Tiamat, I can sense a person's general power level. The brown-haired teen replied as he locked eyes with his fiancée. The next day, because of how popular they had become after all of their achievements were made public, the 4 Satans had also declared that Issei and Sona's rating game against Serug would be public as well. Since it was going to be viewed by a lot of people, a professional announcer was brought in to be the host, instead of Grafia doing it like she had back when Issei had joined Ria's peerage to take down Riser. Welcome one and all to a very exciting event. This will be a rating game for the ages. For the first time since the introduction of the rating games, our Satans have opened them up to the young heirs and heiresses to the Pillar clans. So you can all expect this to be an interesting match, especially when we have Serug Bale, heir to the Bale clan, facing off against Issei Lucifuge, the current head of the Lucifuge family. The commentator announced, though Issei grimaced when he was mentioned. For formality's sake, anytime he was going to be introduced as the head of the Lucifuge clan, his other last names were going to be dropped. Back when he first met his parents, he had dropped the Lucifuge from his name because it felt like a mouthful when combined with Grimory and Haidu, but then he had to take it anyway because of politics. Even after settling into things it still felt strange to him, and even more so when his other names were dropped. Eventually the hype up for the rating game was done and it was time to begin. "What's our move?" Aaron asked as he looked towards the king and queen of the group. For some reason the hairs on the back of his neck were standing up. Sarag and his peerage are powerful given the fact that like us they are undefeated. So we've got to work carefully. For now though. Sona commented before trailing off in thought. After a moment she looked up. "Given what I know of his peerage members this will be very tricky and we'll have to pay close attention to the rolls." Sona commented, a bit put off by the fact their rating game was special in more ways than one. Because of their power and brain, it was decided that rather than risk taking all day with a regular rating game, they would play with a set of rules known as dice rules. Each side was given a 6-sided die, and each peerage member was assigned a number based on what type of evil piece they were in their respective peerages. Both peerage kings would roll their dice, and the results would be added together to determine who could be on the field. "How so?" Ova asked, since he wasn't paying attention when the rules were announced. "Pawns are worth 1, unless more pieces were used on them, so in Sarag's case his pawn Regulus would be a 7. Bishops and knights are both worth 3, while rooks are worth 5, queens are 9, and kings can be anywhere from 1 to 12. Let's say Sarag rolls a 5 and we roll a 6. That means a total of 11 can be spent. So Sarag could send out both of his knights and a bishop for a total of 9, while we could counter by sending me as a queen who also counts for 9. So?" Ova asked, not really understanding what Sona was getting at. "Sarag's peerage is unique. Every member of his group is stronger than you would expect. Enough so that we have to be careful not to let ourselves get overwhelmed. After all Issei is the only one here that gets stronger the longer a fight drags out. Speaking of, you should probably be using boost even when you aren't fighting ice. Sarag has the brute strength to punch through a dragon's scale when he gets serious." Nodding, Issei called out his boosted gear, though he didn't start boosting up just yet. "Alright then, that's the 15-minute mark, the time to talk strategy is over. Let the rating game begin." The announcer spoke up. Sighing, Issei reached for the die that he had been given for the game and rolled. Sarag rolled his die just as quickly. Both peerages were given a screen with which they could see the results of the rolls and watch the fights, so they watched on as the screen began to display the dice rolls. "Alright, it looks like Sarag has rolled a 4 and Issei has rolled a 6 for a total of 10. They heard from the commentator. "That's going to get old very quickly, isn't it?" Issei asked, already fighting off a headache because the sound of the announcer's voice echoed loudly around them. But he didn't get an answer as Sona was already directing his peerage. "Let's start off with a bang. Garen and Kaneko, go have fun." Even though they trusted her judgment and would follow her, they still had to get confirmation from Issei before marching out to fight. He just nodded at them with a smile. "Give 'em hell." Garen and Kaneko were met by both of Sarag's knights and one of his bishops. Oh, it looks like Issei has sent out a combination of his rook Kaneko and bishop Garen, while Sarag sent out his knights Liban and Baruka alongside his bishop Mistita. Will numbers prevail and Sarag take the first win, or will Issei's peerage come out on top even though it's an uneven fight? Who knows, but we'll certainly find out. Ignoring the announcer entirely, Kaneko started to stretch while Garen assembled his grimoire. Sona had told them to start things off with a bang, so neither one were going to hold back. "I guess we'll start." Mistita commented as he pointed his staff towards Kaneko, hoping to use his sacred gear to seal off her ability to move so she could be overwhelmed by the two knights who could easily overpower Garen. Or at least that's what he thought. "Oh? You're somehow preventing me from using my Nekomata abilities." Kaneko commented as she ducked under a lance thrust from Baruka before lashing out with a kick that caused a sickening crunch-like sound from the leg of Baruka's horse. Since he trusted Kaneko to hold her own long enough for him to get rid of Sarag's bishop, Garen ignored her fight and pointed his fully combined grimoire towards Mistita. Frost surge. Unleashing a wave of ice towards the enemy bishop, Garen activated the teleportation spell his grimoire had stored to move out of the way of a sword strike from Sarag's other knight Liban. Glacial burst. Another spell was cast, this time a rippling shock wave that chilled his enemies to the bone burst out from his scepter. But rather than point it towards Mistita, who had only just gotten out of the way of his first spell, Garen had pointed it at Liban. He knew the swordsman would try and dodge, but that was what he wanted. It was a distraction so Kaneko could throw Baruka and his horse at Liban from behind. Garen and Kaneko have remarkable teamwork, despite the fact they haven't been communicating at all. Even after Mistita used her trick vanish sacred gear on the female rook, Kaneko is still fighting on as a true powerhouse rook. It's an absolutely wild battle. The announcer commented at this point, finally having regained enough of himself to do his job and speak. Not that anyone in the audience could blame him. Most of them were still in awe of the fight, not having really expected to see the level of power that the group of fighters were showing off. Oh, and there goes Mistita. That must have hurt quite a bit to be taken out by one attack, even if it was from a rook. The commentator said as Kaneko launched a sneak attack on the bishop that was distracted by running from Garen's barrage of ice. Relax. I've got the rest of this. Kaneko commented to Garen as they stood side by side facing the two knights that Serg had sent out to battle them. If you say so. Nodding her confirmation, Kaneko surprised everyone when she let her Nekomata ears and tail out. They weren't surprised by the fact she was a Nekomata, nor by the fact she had stopped hiding it, at least those that already knew. No, the shock was from the fact her tail had split, making her a two-tailed Nekomata. Oh boy, that's one powerful rook Lord Lucifuge has in his peerage. No longer suppressing her Nekomata side, Kaneko received the full benefits of her species. Not just the enhanced senses, but also the agility, flexibility, and magical ability. Yet those that knew her well enough could see she was still holding back as she one-sidedly beat down Serg's two knights. The first fight goes to Lord Lucifuge. But that the two returned to the base that Issei's peerage was using for the raiding game. Nice job guys. But counting Serg himself, we've still got 6 left to take down. Don't let up just yet. Issei commented as he high-fived Garen while using his other hand to give Kaneko a head pat. Then he rolled the die once again. This time Issei has rolled a 3 and Serg a 5, making a total of 8. I wonder what the matchup this time will be like. For the first round Issei and Sona had decided on Garen and Kaneko rather quickly, but this round the first one to decide who to send out was Serg. He only sent his rook Gandoma. Other than his extraordinary strength, I can't think of anything special about Gandoma or the Balam clan. So he might be the least threatening of them. Right. Sona and Issei went back and forth, but as they thought about how to handle it, Kalwerner stepped up. I've got this one. Are you sure? Sona asked. Kalwerner just nodded her head. Without a better idea they agreed. Alright, but be careful. Issei and Sona said in unison. Smiling, Kalwerner nodded at the two before making her way to the battlefield to face off with Gandoma. It looks like this matchup will be rook versus knight. Gandoma is known for his abnormal level of strength, but Kalwerner is a former fallen angel. Who truly has the advantage? I don't know, but I suspect we'll find out. The commentator spoke up, somewhat surprised at just how little info he'd been given to talk about Kalwerner if she appeared. Of course he wasn't given much for the others either, but of Issei's peerage, she was the one that they had the least amount of info on. Don't hold it against me, since I'm not holding back. I'm not either. Kalwerner responded as she drew her sword and attached her shield to her wrist. Gandoma was being cautious since Kalwerner had a longer reach with her sword, but he did get close enough for him to be able to attack if he saw the chance. It was a fairly close fight, teetering back and forth as they clashed. Gandoma's strength being enough to offset Kalwerner's advantage in reach. Especially after a bad block with her shield caused the devil to bat it away from her, the clasp holding it in place against her arm being broken from the force of his fist meeting the shield. But Kalwerner wasn't giving up easily, having scored a few dozen small cuts on the devil. That sword really hurts. But I can power through the pain long enough to take you down. Gandoma commented after he purposely gave the swordswoman an opening to take advantage of. Kalwerner's blade had only just started to cut into his side when the rather tall devil brought his arm into his side and pinched the blade in place long enough for him to lash out with his free hand. His fist hammered into Kalwerner's cheek and sent her flying back before she harshly bounced headfirst off the ground upon landing. But then he fell to his knees and declared he was retiring as well. His words only just managed to come out before he finished falling to the ground out cold. Oh, a draw for the second round of this battle. While not quite enough to even things back up, it does help shift the balance back towards an even match for Serg. Was heard as the announcer spoke up. Issei and the rest of his peerage were a little sad that Kalwerner didn't manage a perfect win, but they were proud that she managed the draw. I didn't expect his strength to be able to allow him to power through that. I mean, she had the advantage in reach, speed, and the fact that her weapon is a holy blade. Sona commented, finding herself very impressed with Serg's rook. Yeah, but we'll have to figure out something to cheer her up when we're done here. She's probably going to be beating herself up over it. Issei commented as he started to roll his die for the third time. He had a 3 pop up for his roll. Oh, Lord Lucifuge has rolled a 3 and the young heir to the Bale clan has rolled a 2 for a grand total of 5. I'm going this time, boss. Ova commented, his blood boiling to fight. He had held himself back as much as he could, but the teenage dragon couldn't stand the boredom any longer. Alright. Be careful though. Nah, it won't be that hard. Ova commented with a grin. He could see who he was facing already as Serg had already sent out his second rook. He knew the young man well. Bova was still smirking even as he strode onto the battleground. Hey Ladora, it's been a while. Oh boy. I can't afford to hold back now. Ladora commented when he saw Bova approaching. Both of them just looked at each other for a moment, but then Ladora crossed his arms and began to glow. His body shifted and stretched to become a rather sizable dragon. Hey, you finally learned how to do it. Maybe this'll be more fun than I thought. Ova commented as he took on his full dragon form as well. End of the part 9. So how was this story? I hope you like it. And if you like it, share this story with your friends and like the video too. And don't forget to subscribe our channel for daily awesome fanfiction. Okay, it's time for me to go. Bye bye.